We all know that Christmas time for kids means one thing: gifts. During the 18th century, wooden toys were popular. Some of the most popular and best-selling Christmas toys in more recent history were Star Wars toys, Transformer toys, Power Ranger toys, Mr. Potato Head, Operation, Smurfs, Slinkies, and the Rubik Cubes. Fun fact, there are 30 poneglyphs. If you don't count the 4 rogue poneglyphs, you have 26 cubes, the exact number of cubes in the Rubik's Cube. It would be interesting, I thought, if there was a puzzle element to the poneglyphs that when pieced together correctly reads a completely new message. In Greek mythology, Prometheus is credited for stealing fire from the gods and gifting it to humanity in the form of technology, knowledge, and civilization. Prometheus was known for his intelligence and for being a champion of mankind.
Champion?
And I believe that in the One Piece world, there was also a gift that was given to humanity to allow them to progress their civilization and to liberate them from tyranny. And I believe that Lamu, our Joy Boy, was the one to gift humanity with this gift. This of course would tie in with my theory that Joy Boy is Santa Claus, because what would Santa Claus be without his white sack of gifts? I think most of you have already guessed it at this point. The gift that I'm talking about is of course devil fruits. In the story of Santa Claus, Christmas elves live with Santa Claus at the North Pole. They make toys in the workshop as Santa Claus cannot work alone. The dwarves of the Tontada tribe is the most obvious answer to fill the shoes of the Santa's elves in One Piece. And of course, the location of the workshop would be Enies Lobby, which I'm proposing to be the North Pole. This would be fitting also, since the first time in the story we see anyone eating the devil fruits since Luffy in the first chapter is at Enies Lobby when Kaku and Khalifa eat their fruits. Just as we've seen in the underground Smile Factory, Tontata are very capable of growing any plants, including devil fruits. I believe that the Great Imagination's magnum opus, their crowning achievement, was the development of a tree which could bear devil fruits. Without the help, technology, and knowledge from the allied races, none of it would have been possible. What I imagine is this: the center of the workshop, which for this video we'll call the Imaginarium, was full of amazing inventions, maybe similar to Vegapunk's lab on Egghead, but even more whimsical. At the center of all the chaos and excitement was a giant tree. The giant tree was fully decorated with shiny glowing fruits that were growing from the tree. The fruits were colorful and came in every color of the rainbow. Visually, obviously the fruits look like baubles on a Christmas tree, which it's no wonder they don't taste so good. The tree somehow harnessed the dreams, wishes, and imaginations of the people in the world. So now we have the gift. Fruits from a tree that gives people special powers. But a gift is not a gift unless it is delivered and given. And how do we go about delivering all of these fruits to the whole world in record time? So this is where we move on to Santa's magical sleigh pulled by his flying reindeers, or the One Piece equivalent of it at least. See, I believe there would have been at least 3 sleighs used by Lamu, our Santa Claus figure, and these sleighs, I believe, were pulled by dragons instead of reindeers. The water dragon, the ground dragon, and the sky dragon. Yes, dragons. I admit it, it doesn't have much to do with Christmas, but One Piece is first and foremost a story about pirates, and both Japanese and Norse mythology has recurring themes of dragons. And let's just say that since Yule is a Norse celebration, it counts for Christmas too, okay? Also, dragons are awesome, so stop complaining. Anyway, 3 dragons pulling 3 sleighs, and if we look to the good old Greeks for inspiration, I think that we can think of these sleighs as being more like chariots, ridden by the gods. And how fitting that would be in this case, because I believe that the figures riding these 3 sleighs, you guessed it, are the 3 great kings: Poseidon, Pluton, and Uranus. If we follow this train of thought, we know that Poseidon is a mermaid, and the most likely chariot is the Noah pulled by the Sea Kings. Sea Kings are ginormous monsters that are often reptilian in nature, hence I think that they can be considered water dragons. Now, how they would have traveled quickly to the different parts of the world is by traveling through calm belts, and what's more, navigating through the White Strom, otherwise known as the Shiroiryu, White Dragon in Japanese. If you remember, the White Strom is an underwater whirlpool. Rumors have it that ships that enter the White Strom will be discovered days later in waters impossibly far removed from their original location, which Luffy perfectly describes as a warp zone. What better way to deliver gifts to people in record time through this underwater highway? Next is Pluton, which I have narrowed down to being the dwarves of the Tontadas, and here's some reasons why. Pluton the planet is considered a dwarf planet, and in this story we have people who call themselves dwarves. Pluton is the god of the underworld, and Tontadas have heavy associations to the underground. The ancient Greeks saw mushrooms as a symbol of Pluto, of the underworld, and afterlife, fitting since mushrooms often grow on decomposing things. I also personally like the idea that by adding Plu in front of Tontada, you get Plutontada. I believe that the Tontadas rode a giant mole.
Mole, 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 mole.
An idea that I've seen circulating around and agree with. If you have watched any of these theories regarding it, you would have heard that the word for mole in kanji is written as ground dragon. An added bonus for me is that the word mole, written in katakana as moru, actually means tinsels in Japanese. Plus, a mole who digs and lives underground is a perfect companion to the tontadas who also live underground. The chariot for Pluton, I think, could be a Wano-style full-body kabuto armor, which would look absolutely badass. Maybe the design will make the mole look even more like a grand dragon.
Not like this.
In keeping with the 90s Toys vibes, the armor could also take inspiration from something like Power Rangers Samurai, since the Tiger Drill Megazord in the show looks like this. Imagine the looks on the shiny-eyed trio and the tontadas when they see this bad boy. Moles would also have been the perfect creatures, as seen in the chapter covers, to travel straight through the ground to their delivery destinations. Again, another perfect highway. Uranus, I'm guessing, would be a Birkin. They have the largest white wings of the races we've seen so far, and it's the location where Enel, the man with the biggest god complex, comes from. The fact that it's also still shrouded in so many mysteries makes it the most suspicious. I think also the chariot of Uranus could be a gigantic version of the Arc Maxim, but pulled by Eastern-style dragons, who can create flame clouds like Kaido and Momo's dragon forms. Dragons, naturally being one of the fastest flyers in the world of One Piece, would be the perfect chariot pullers for traveling through the air at top speeds. And if that wasn't enough, I believe that this giant Arc Maxim had Minks using Electro to power up the ship, and had ancient giants pulling the oars. Now, before we move on to the next section, a mini theory on this last comment about the ancient giants pulling the oars. I believe that Oars from Thriller Bark and Oars Jr. are descendants of the King of the Jovians from Joeboy's era. I believe their task was to pull the oars of a giant flying ship, a ship so gigantic that it was considered a continent. This is how I believe that Oars got his epithet of the continent puller, because if you didn't know, an oar is something that is pulled. An alternative, darker version is that the name Oars could be a derogatory name for the ancient giant slaves who were forced to row giant ships the size of continents. This version would reflect our world's history a lot more, in that a galley slave were slaves who were forced to row in a galley, which was a type of ship that relies on oars to get anywhere. There were even cases of pirates using galley slaves from the 16th to the 19th century. There's actually more to talk about in regards to the dark history of both Christmas and pirates later in the video. Now, I think you're going to like this next one. So I talked earlier about how I believe that the devil fruits were the gifts that Lamu gave to the people, right? Well, let me tell you what Japanese people traditionally wrapped their gifts in. It was the furoshiki. Furoshiki wrapping cloths are actually making a comeback in these eco-friendly times, since it's reusable and looks really nice. But traditionally, Japanese people used furoshiki wrapping cloths for multiple purposes, like to wrap and transport goods like a bag, and to present less formal gifts. Furoshiki cloths came in many different patterns and colors, which all symbolize different things. In One Piece, we have actually seen furoshiki of a certain pattern being used a bunch of times. This pattern has the meaning of longevity, fertility, family, and prosperity. The origins of this pattern can even be traced back to ancient Egypt, from where it came to Japan via the Silk Road. And the legend goes like this. A thief broke into a house empty-handed and looked for something to wrap and transport the stolen goods in. Since then, this pattern has been associated with thieves and stolen goods. And the name of this pattern and what it looks like is this, the arabesque pattern, which in Japanese is arabesque. So, where have we seen this pattern before in this story? Well, as I mentioned, Oda Sensei has been showing us the arabesque patterned furoshiki to show thieving many times in the panels. But we've also seen this spiral time and time again to show ominous situation. And of course, it is always associated with the patterns found on every single devil fruits. Oda has been telling us from the very start that devil fruits are not a curse or something to be feared. It is a gift. And how fitting that the furoshiki pattern that Oda has picked represents thieves. After all, what would a pirate be without stealing? A couple things to add here is, of course, that arabesque in Japanese, arabesque, sounds suspiciously similar to arabasta or alabaster, which makes sense since the legend of the pattern goes back to ancient Egypt. Another thing to note, as I mentioned earlier, is that every color used in furoshiki designs has a meaning. Purple, for instance, which is the color of Luffy and Blackbeard's fruit, represents high rank and longevity. Now, when I said that I found one of the biggest clues when doing research for Christmas in Japan, I wasn't even talking about the furoshiki. I've got something even bigger.